it's always a little quiet at first. But once we get rolling, sir.
When does the Olympics come into Pennsylvania?
Well, good news. The way the Senior Olympics works is there are 300,000 athletes who are 50 to 100 plus that compete in state, local, regional, and national competition. The best of those 300,000 senior athletes qualify for the nationals, which is what we focused on. We focused on the national competition, and there were about 13 to 15,000 at the nationals every 2 years. But every year, even the year of the national, there is all 50 states have a statewide competition. Pennsylvania has a very large statewide competition. In fact, one of the most impressive athletes I had met in all of the competitions that we'd gone to at the national level was from Pennsylvania. He was from Scranton, and he was a track and field guy. He competed against Adolf, and he would smoke Adolf at certain events. Like he would do like the triple jump and the long jump and that sort of thing. He was extremely fit, and he could run. I mean, I'm a triathlete. I like to run and swim. I'm pretty agile, and this guy moved like a 20-year-old, and he was in his late 80s. I think he was 88. And so it was amazing. This guy he's a freak of nature. I mean, on all honesty, it was just like that doesn't happen often. But yeah, every year there's the Pennsylvania State Games. He told me about it, and it's a very large competition. Every one of the 50 states has a competition. You can imagine the larger states have better organized, larger, more competition, and Pennsylvania is not an exception. So what I would do, if any of you are interested, I can see the gears are turning for you, sir. What I would recommend is just Googling the Pennsylvania State Senior Games, or maybe even contacting someone with Phoebe Ministries. I'm sure they'd be happy to help, and because there's probably going to be a lot of people here today who have the same question. Contact your local games. Anyone can enter. The registration fees are really surprisingly cheap. Sometimes at local games, usually it's around $25. And then that'll get you into 3 or 4 events, and you have to pay an additional $5 or $10 for additional events. And what's interesting is you see a lot of people. I was talking to this guy. He was a 92-year-old high jumper, and we were at the nationals, and there were very few high jumpers in their 90s. And in fact, there was only one other person competing against him. So at the nationals, so I said, "Oh wow, this is great. Are you nervous? Before the competition?" He's like, "No, I'm not nervous. I'm getting a silver at least." So it's not bad. And so the first guy went, and he jumped, I think, like 3.5 feet or something, and he was like, I could do that, no big deal, and he got the gold. So, but that's what's great too is you are going to be grouped with your age. You're not going to be jumping or sprinting or diving against 50-year-olds. But because people sometimes ask now, why didn't you show if the athletes can be as young as 50? Why didn't you show any 55-year-olds or whatnot? And I'll tell you, it was because part of it was my vanity. These men and women had like 6-pack abs and were like so ripped. I was just like, I get away. I don't even want to look at you guys. You disgust me. It was amazing. In fact, the reason I first got involved with sports after playing in high school, I didn't do any collegiate sports, but then at the end of college, I started doing triathlons. And it was because at my university, a big popular thing was to volunteer at this big triathlon. It's one of the biggest triathlons on the West Coast. It's called Wildflower. And so for college kids, really, in all honesty, what it is you go drinking, and then you wake up really early and pass out Gatorades to the athletes the next morning. And it's just a lot of fun. And so I was doing that one year. I was 21 or 22. And so we're waiting there. I'm pretty hungover. I'm not feeling too well. And then all these runners are running by doing the last leg of their triathlon. And when doing a triathlon, you'll see whether it's an Ironman or a smaller one, you have your age written down on your calf in a Sharpie. And so there are these people my age run by, and it's like, oh, whatever, overachievers. And then you see, but then I started seeing these men and women that were in their 60s and 70s. I remember seeing someone in his 80s running by, and I thought, man, this is pathetic. I'm like in the prime of my life, and I'm not like, and I'm wasting it, you know? And so that next year I signed up for Wildflower and I started competing, and it was really, you know, because I felt this sort of this interest in getting out there and throwing myself in the mix, because I wasn't putting myself to the full potential. And I think that happens a lot with seniors. If anyone here is thinking about competing, the Senior Games makes it really easy. They make the competition as even as they can. And if you're old enough, you'll probably get a gold or a silver medal. Yes, we have another question.
What is the average age of the women playing basketball? All the teams put together.
Are you thinking of competing yourself? Is that why? Squaring up a competition? So the average age of senior athletes in general skews young, because there's a lot of athletes who are in their 50s. A lot of the baby boomers, I mean, they want to stay really active and very fit and do all the things that they used to do when they're 30, for better or for worse. And you know, so the average age is actually about 63 years old, much younger than, actually that's the age of Nikki, the redhead in the Tigerettes, who's the baby of the film. And but you know, there were very robust competition for athletes that were older than that. When we were casting the film, that was one of the most difficult parts of the process. Was, you know, we had 1,000 responses to our casting call, and then it was going through all the photos, going through all of the biographies and the stories, and everyone has a great story. You know, I mean, if you're a senior athlete, you've got a good story, period. And so it was difficult. We wanted a mix of ages, of sports, geographic regions, race, sex, and so we ended up choosing these folks. But we were debating at the end between the Tigerettes and the Splash. It was a group of women who were in their late 80s and early 90s, women's basketball, and they play out of San Diego. And so we ended up choosing the Tigerettes because, of course, when we told the Tigerettes we were debating between including them and another team in the film, they're so competitive, they tried to figure out how they could get in. They actually recorded a song about their team and sent us an MP3. And so we were like, all right, let's just give it to them. They'll make good subjects. Yes, sir. Right up here in the front.
Thank you. The film is just incredible.
Thank you.
I think, to me, it was all about the quest for meaning and purpose and relationship. But there are other aging persons with chronic illness in our skilled nursing facilities, and sometimes in assisted living. There are other aging persons who struggle with dementias. How does the film speak to those persons?
Yeah.
And motivate those persons?
You know, one of the most rewarding conversations I've had after a screening was actually in my hometown in Sacramento. And we were doing a screening at a nursing home facility. People with post-acute care, people who were very immobile. Almost everyone had a walker. In fact, at the screening, they set aside outside of the screening room, they had almost like this parking lot of walkers. It was crazy. I took a picture of it. But probably the most rewarding conversation was one of the women who was at that screening. She was in her 90s. I think she was about 92. She watches the film, and most everyone there is having serious care and has serious physical disabilities. And challenges. And this woman approaches me afterwards with her walker, and she says, you know what? I am so inspired by Bradford that, you know, I can do more. What I'm going to do is every week for one day on Wednesdays, because for whatever reason, it's the day she has no doctor's appointments, she's at the home. She said that every Wednesday I'm going to use my walker as little as possible and try to use it as little as possible and walk using the walls and walk using friends and just trying to get around more. And I have a friend who helped set up the screening that I've been in touch with, and she has been doing that. And in fact, she's not only been able to do that on Wednesdays, but she's also doing it on Sundays as well. And now, and I think that's, really the concern I had. There were some people that one of the partners we worked with to share the film across the country was the National Council on Aging. They are the national network of senior centers. And when they first saw the film, they said, oh, well, we love the movie, but I don't know if we want to partner because a lot of the seniors we serve may be discouraged by the film and discouraged with the fact that, well, I'll never be able to pole vault. Like, why should I even try? I'll never be able to play basketball. Why should I even try? And, we didn't really have an answer to the question because we had just finished the film. We hadn't shared the movie and gotten feedback yet. But as we started doing screenings, they eventually decided to partner with us because they saw the impact was people weren't discouraged at all. In fact, it was the opposite. When people see the film, they tend to be more inspired and tend to see maybe ways, even marginal ways, that they can take steps to be more active and can see people going through difficult challenges and think about what they could do differently. And that woman, really represented that most directly to me. And we've seen that in a lot of other instances as well. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to respond to that last comment. I thought this movie was absolutely inspiring. And I'm not a quote-unquote an athlete, never have been, but my sport has been swimming. And I believe, and I do swimming every day, but not to compete. I compete with myself. How many laps do I do? And how many can I do? But then I see at the Y where I swim, I see other people. Some people are walking, and they walk every day. Some people are doing water aerobics, and they're doing it every day, because I see the same people. And I have some people who keep track of me. That, I missed you. I said, I came later. But so I find this movie is so inspiring, because it gives us a sense of what we can achieve when we have purpose and goals in our life. Not whether we can compete and win. That's wonderful if I'm there. But if I can simply get my body to respond and do and move for as long as I can. Thank you so much for the sharing of this film.
Thank you. Thank you.
Could you give us a couple examples of feedback you've gotten from caregivers about how they've adapted this for more challenging populations that they serve?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually someone just came to me, Terry came to me, and Terry down at the end, right after the presentation, and she described to me, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, there's so many terms for describing different types of care, but she works in a unit that helps people with everything from cognitive, dementia challenges, physical challenges. You're shaking your head no.
I'm the occupational therapy assistant for St. Luke's Hospital's Older Adult Behavioral Health Center. A lot of people confuse us with the dementia center, but we are there to help folks with mental illness. So we're talking about things from depression, recent loss, people that have tried to kill themselves, or in a place where they're just not focusing on life. And what I wanted to share with them personally was that this film was brought to my attention, and we do show it to our patients. And that's okay. One of the things that we've noticed, especially with the gentleman who lost his wife, is that it's so incredibly impactful to our patients who are just starting to refocus on life. And maybe they're not going to be in the Olympics, but they do need to get back to life again. And this is an incredible tool for that, for self-esteem, for just kind of looking at things that are pleasant again, or maybe what your leisure hobbies could be. Those worlds are usually closed pretty tightly by the time we see them, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. And one thing that she had mentioned too is that her community offers programs and classes and courses, and she noticed that in sharing the movie and Earl's story about losing a spouse but still staying engaged in life, she's found that attendance was kind of going upwards after showing the movie as a way to kind of build that self-esteem that you talked about and having someone to relate with. And you know, and just the little I want to add to that as well from the film's perspective, Adolf also is a widower. It's not touched upon in the film, but that's actually how Adolf and Earl first sort of had built a relationship, was they connected about being Texas boys, but then also being widowers and the challenges that come with that and how competition helps them get through it. And so, you know, another example, I think, when it comes to how the film is leading to measurable changes in communities, it's just like what Phoebe Ministries is doing with some of the communities. There's a senior activity program, senior Olympic program that's being put on. And one thing that people think is that the Senior Olympics has to be this series of grueling, challenging physical feats, but really there are a lot of Senior Olympic events that are not quite as, there aren't as many barriers to entry, I guess I could say. One of the most inspiring athletes I'd seen in all of the competitions that I witnessed at the Nationals was in bowling. Roger also competed in bowling. He was a gold medal winner because there was no one else over 100 bowling either. But there was a 94-year-old man that stood out to me, and he was from North Dakota, and he had a walker, and you know, he was kind of hunched over. He had his walker, looked very frail, and someone pointed over to me, hey, see that guy over there? That guy is the national champion. He has the record for the national record for number of consecutive strikes bowled. And I'm like, what? No way, this guy? And so he's called up, and he shuffles very slowly up to the start of the lane, and he's got this basket in his walker with the ball. And I think it's probably like a 7-pound ball. It's a really light ball. And he's got the ball, and he goes up to the front of the alley, pulls out the ball, he kind of shuffles his walker to the side, doesn't move his feet at all, and he just rolls strike after strike after strike. And it was amazing. And you know, and I bring that up because there are a lot of ways that people that even that have physical challenges can be more active. The woman I talked about who was walking more, I think what Phoebe Ministries is doing is great, putting on their Senior Olympic competition and having residents and having the seniors put it on and plan it, because I think that's one of the things that is most valuable about these competitions is the camaraderie. And not just the camaraderie between the competitors, but also with the staff too. One of the Senior Olympic competitions I found that was really fascinating was in Oklahoma City. We had a screening at a CCRC, and they decided to put on a Senior Olympic competition. There's been a handful of communities that have done that, but what was interesting about theirs is they actually made it a competition between residents and staff. And they picked sports that were maybe kind of even the playing field a bit, because the staff, of course, was decades younger on average. But they ended up choosing pickleball, bowling, table tennis, bocce ball, and a couple other sports like that. And that wonderful new sport I just learned about today would probably be a good fit also. But the staff ended up losing, actually. They fell to the same sword that Chris and I did. And it was really funny because I think it was the same thing. They just underestimated. What happened, apparently, I found out, was that the staff just kind of didn't take it seriously. And the residents took it very seriously. They had teams, they were training, and they won. So that's a couple of examples. Ma'am, you had a question.
I thank you for the work you put into the film and the love that you've shown. I wonder if you have any ideas about extending a film like this to the other heroes and heroines in our community. I'm a parish nurse. We have elders who work in every area of service. They work at the soup kitchen. They take care of grandchildren. We have people who will make telephone calls, etc. Is there a way to showcase elders in other ways other than the Olympics? Have you considered any other options?
I mean, that's a great question, and you know, there as a documentary filmmaker, you know, that's the constant challenge is choosing which story you want to tell, and you know what might be a good fit for your skill set, and you know, it's tough. It's really tough because there are so many inspiring stories out there. Even when making Age of Champions, there were so many inspiring stories that we couldn't include. You know, we wanted to have more female characters, for instance. We wanted to have that married couple in the film. We wanted to include more about Adolf and Earl's World War II service. You know, so it's such a challenge. And, you know, I think that what's great about, you know, in Deb's introduction for me, she had mentioned a program. We teach something called the Doc School out in California. We teach high school students how to make documentary films. And the way we do that is we give them a deadline. Say 10 weeks, you need to produce a 3 to 5 minute film, a short film. And we give them the film equipment and the basic knowledge. But really what we ask them to do is partner with local nonprofits, partner with local organizations, people in the community who are doing positive things, and they tell those stories, because there are so many stories out there that we couldn't get to all of them. Let alone, like with Age of Champions, dedicate 3 to 4 years of our lives to the story. So, so that's one way that we think, you know, training the next generation. A lot of our graduates have gone on to NYU, USC, Chicago, universities with UCLA with great film programs, and they are more aware of different stories in their community that maybe sometimes go unexplored. And so I think that in some ways is the best thing that we can do as filmmakers is help train more filmmakers. I thought I saw another hand. Oh.
Thanks. It was beautiful. I'm a 53-year-old pastor, and I have kids who think I'm old, and I have older people who think I'm young, and I say this is the oldest I've ever been, so I can't, you know, go beyond that. I'm also a competitive wrestler, and I coach high school, and it's from an ego point of view, it's wonderful to go in and have kids who look at you like you're older than their dad, or maybe as old as their grandfather in some cases, and say, well, we're not going to hurt you. And they change their minds pretty quickly. And my wife keeps saying, when are you going to stop doing this? You're too old. And I said, well, when I break something in my 70s, maybe I'll stop. I think in an age-denying culture like this is a phenomenal piece of work that really changes people's minds, and should be shown maybe in every high school around the country to help them appreciate their grandparents and great-grandparents and how resilient they are. I think it's just a beautiful gift. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And to your point about showing the film to youth, and you know, we've only had limited opportunities to do so, and I agree that it's something that when we set out to make the movie, we actually talked about doing this, having the film be see if we can integrate into curriculum for physical education or maybe humanities and that sort of thing, and it just didn't quite. You know, we're a small organization, so we didn't quite really have the bandwidth to do that, but. One reason I think you're completely right is a lot of the senior athletes, probably the most common profession was a teacher, physical education teachers particularly. About half of the Tigerettes were all PE teachers, and you know, and I think that was really indicative of how, you know, the attitudes of these senior athletes really, and they're inspiring the next generation, and they're great examples. I mean, you're a great example for all of your students and all the kids that you pin when you show them the old man strength, right? and you know, it's I think really important, and I think especially important for that intergenerational shattering of sort of those ageist ideas. Thank you for that.
We have one back here.
Yes.
I just had a question about the gender balance in the video. There weren't many female individual sports showcased. Is it because there are more male athletes in the senior games, or just not others?
You know, there are more females competing in the games, and that is one of the biggest challenges that we faced was telling stories that complemented each other, and that sort of, rather than our film being a showcase of different stories, we wanted to tell one story with different people, different characters interweaving, and for there to be common themes. It was definitely a challenge. We anticipated having that couple, the married couple, and we had one other female story that we were planning on following. It's just how the film worked out, which is tough. I mean, we could have. I think one thing that we really give, that Chris and I, my film partner and I, we are most thankful of for the whole filmmaking process was the casting. We were really happy with the people that we chose. We do wish there was more diversity. That said, the stories that we ended up choosing, I think, were really probably the most inspiring in a way, and that were inspiring in a way that complemented each other. So it was a difficult decision, and it was one of our biggest regrets, and something that we've been rightfully criticized for. But yeah, that's just, when making a documentary and trying to tell one story, it's really hard to get all the pieces that you really want.
It also has to do with Title IX.
I think you're right about that. The Tigerettes talked about that extensively. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, women weren't included. I mean, when I went, I was a teacher, and I went through high school, and the only sport you had was basketball. I played field hockey intramurally, we did gymnastics intramurally, but the only varsity sport you had.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why there aren't that many women that have had that experience. I'm sitting back here thinking, what could I get involved in that's going to be, and there really isn't anything, because we didn't even have track and field.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of my favorite things about making the movie, was the sense of perspective and of our country's history, and how things have changed really, I think, pretty quickly. And I didn't feel that. When you're in your 20s, everything seems like it's going by really slowly. But as you get older, I think you kind of get a perspective, and you see that things have come a long way, and have further to go, but have come a long way. I mean, I felt that way talking to Mavis and the Tigerettes about Title IX. I thought that talking to John and Brad about segregation as well. I just did an interview on NPR with John, and it was to commemorate some of the 50th anniversaries that passed as different milestones for the civil rights movement. And John was always very reflective with us. We talked about the civil rights movement. We talked about how his grandmother, who lived with him when he was a child, was a freed slave. And things that just boggled your mind, things that you're like, wow, I cannot believe I'm talking to this. I mean, he's a living relic. But the idea of opportunity really, it made me feel very lucky, and made me feel like the people in my generation especially have so many more opportunities than people even of your generation. John had talked about that at that NPR interview. He talked about, he said out loud, he ended up being very successful, went to college, and as a black man growing through those disadvantaged times, he was able to do very well and have a wonderful family and career. But he did reflect for the first time recently in the years I've known him about where could my life have been if I didn't have those challenges. And Mavis talked about that as well. And like, if I could play basketball, where could I have been? I would have been she talked about being in the WNBA. And it's really kind of amazing to hear him talk about that, and also kind of sad as well. It made me feel a bit sad for them that they did miss out on opportunities, and thankful that we have them now.
I also had to resign when I got pregnant.
Yeah, I mean, there's yikes.
Yeah.
I just have a question. I guess it was John that said he couldn't swim in the pool, but he swam in the Washington area there.
The reflecting pool, yeah.
Did they ever get caught?
They told really funny stories. John and Brad were just, God, they're so fun to hang out with and just hear their stories. Yeah, the security guards would always chase them, and they were kids, so they were quicker, and and more crafty. They lived in the area. They knew all the tricks and such. I don't know how many of you have all been to D.C., but they grew up. D.C. had changed a lot since they were born there in 1919. They were born in a neighborhood where the Lincoln, coincidentally, where the Lincoln Memorial is now. So they knew in the Foggy Bottom area. So they knew all the ins and outs. And John talked about how slimy the bottom of the reflecting pool is, and how he could feel it in his feet. And then he talked about swimming in the Potomac River and how there's these little places. I think it was a lot cleaner back then, hopefully. But yeah, it's really fascinating to talk to the characters about their life experiences. Roger's another interesting person. He remembers the end of World War I. Being born in 1909, he was alive. I think the war ended in 1917. He was about 8 years old, and he lived in Boston at the time and remembers the parade celebrating. So there's just so much history and life, and I think a lot of you, and especially the younger people in the audience, something that I heard that really resonated with me after making this movie is that whenever an older person dies, it's like a library burns down. Because these stories are so unique to each person's experience, and are sort of this collection of life experiences, and they can give you a perspective that's just so fascinating. So I found that to be a lot of fun, just chatting with these people. I'll repeat your question. Go ahead.
I think size has a lot to do with it. When we grew up, it was a small high school, and we could play all of the sports because of the size of the high school. Now with the schools being consolidated and big school systems, only the very best have a chance to compete.
Yeah. It's fascinating how things have changed, and as the population grows and is more diverse, and there are all these new challenges, and but yeah, I found that to be really. I used to ask Roger, like give me your perspective on American history over the last 100 years. And it was just so fascinating to hear about the different movements, like you were talking about school consolidation or populations growing, and access due to that, and so it's really just a fascinating thing to think about how things change and to ponder where they might be heading to. Yes.
So I hear you know their birthdays, their year of birth, you have clearly taken these people to heart. And yet you're a filmmaker. I don't know what your other films are about, but I would like to know, what do you feel is your obligation to these participants in your movie and others going forward as they age? Are you their friend now? Are you their therapist? What?
Wouldn't be qualified for that. Well, yeah, I think one of the big secrets to making a good documentary is to have a good relationship with your subjects, so that they trust you, that they want to share things with you that perhaps they wouldn't share with a stranger, because that's what we began as, strangers. And I think over the course of getting to know each other and building that trust both ways, we did become friends. And I'm in touch and friends with the characters in the film, their families. And I think that's one of the most enjoyable parts of being a documentary filmmaker is with all of our films. We bring these people into our lives as filmmakers, and they remain there. And John just called me on Labor Day weekend. I was out in California, and going to a barbecue with friends and stuff, and John calls me from Washington D.C. He's like, "Hey Keith, what are you doing today? Can you come to my barbecue?" And I'm like, "John, if I got on a plane right now, at this very moment, I could get there as it's wrapping up. But thanks for inviting me. I'll see you." And I had a screening in D.C. just a few weeks ago, and we got together and had dinner and talked about things. And yeah, we talk on the phone. Adolf just called me the other day. So it's really fun to stay in touch and watch them grow as people too, because they are changing, and there are things about them changing, and it's really exciting to see kind of what their plans are and what they're doing, and yeah, it's one of the pleasures of the filmmaking process.
What will you do next?
The question was, what will we do next? We do films of all different subjects. Our other movies are about the culture of Mongolia, about baseball in Western China, this film, and then we're actually thinking about doing a film about taxes. Talk about inspiring, huh? Doing a funny documentary about our broken tax system. Deb had mentioned before in my introduction that I worked in politics before filmmaking. I worked at the Capitol in Sacramento, and I've worked in DC as well. So it's something I'm interested in, my film partner also, so we want to do something that's political and policy related.
Thank you very much for your film, and I was kind of expecting to see how much purpose impacted their lives, but I was happy to see the community part of it and how community was also a big inspiring event. My question, though, is when you were getting those 1,000 applications to become part of your film, what did you find was the most common reason, or what are some of the common reasons that people had begun competing? What emboldened them to take that step?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think I've actually ever gotten that question before. It's been a couple of years since I've looked at those casting calls, but thinking back, I'd say a lot of people sort of were encouraged to do it by family or doctors to get active, or they had a health challenge themselves. My mother, for instance, she's 60, and she was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and it was really devastating for her. She was really concerned. You know, it's a serious illness and can be very dangerous. But that spurred her into being more active, and now at this point, 6 years later, she's more physically active and healthier than I can remember from youth. So I think that story kind of holds true with a lot of people. With the table tennis couple I told you about, a lot of times it's sort of like an intervention almost. Sometimes self-inflicted, sometimes where they can see they're maybe not on the best trajectory. But a lot of times it's people that maybe enter a stage in their life, they maybe have a little more time, they maybe gained a little too much weight, or you know, they might want to make new friends, or they might need a distraction from, you know, losing a close family member. And so I find that those are probably the most common reasons. But you know, you brought up the point you made before you asked your question. I think was really important. That, you know, one other thing besides the goal, the being goal oriented, another commonality I noticed with all of the characters in our film and all the senior athletes we got to know along the way was that they have these great social networks that support them, whether it's their family or their church or a club or organization, other competitors in this case. You know, they really need to have that social support, and I think isolation is probably the deadliest thing for seniors, is what I've really kind of learned, and it's destructive physically, and it's also destructive cognitively. And I think that's what's great about, you know, organizations like Phoebe Ministries, to put on competitions, to have activities, to have you know, meetings like this that are encouraging people to be active physically and mentally, to meet new people, to have new experiences, and not to be isolated. I mean, I think that is extremely important. Yes?
We have time for one more question. My question was, where can I get a hold of the video? Like, do you guys have a Facebook page, YouTube?
Yeah, so our website's ageofchampions.org. You can go to that, and you know, you can repost like our trailer and that sort of thing. But actually, Phoebe Ministries has purchased a number of DVDs and T-shirts. You can actually get them right out there. We normally sell them on our website for $25. You can get them for $20 right out here. And so, you know, in purchasing them, you're supporting Phoebe Ministries, and you're also supporting our organization, because we are a nonprofit, and we, you know, are always looking for more support to produce our next project, even if you hate taxes. Actually, especially if you hate taxes. But yeah, thanks so much to Phoebe Ministries and all of you here. This has been a great Q&A and a lot of fun. I'm not in a rush to leave, so if you have any other questions, if we didn't get to you, feel free to come up and say hello or just introduce yourself. But thanks again for having me. Really appreciate it. Pick up a DVD and hope to see you soon.